Welcome all to the webinar titled Driving Positive Change with HRDD Toolkits, which is co-organized by the Fair Labor Association and the Tearfund. I'm Richa Mittal. I'm the Executive Vice President and Chief Innovation Officer at the Fair Labor Association. This is a public webinar and it's being recorded, and we will share the video with the registrants. Just few logistics before we start the presentations. First, the audience can raise their questions through the Q&A function. Our speakers will build the responses in their remarks, and we will come back to any audience questions at the end of the webinar. We have Chatham House rules, so you can use the information, but the information cannot be attributed. We have divided the webinar into two parts. One is more presentation. So during the first 20 minutes, we'll have Nisha Thirumalai, Innovation Manager at the FLA, will introduce the Converged HREDD tool, which is meant to be used by companies to assess their HREDD programs at different levels. And then we'll have Lorraine Tu, who is the Policy Associate at the Tearfund, who will present the Waste Pickers Due Diligence tool, as many companies now are using recycled materials in their supply chains. The second part of the webinar, we'll hear from various panelists on the use cases of both the tools, and we'll also answer audience questions. So this particular webinar is part of FLA's learning series under our Pilot Supply Chain Action Network initiative, also called SCAN, which looks at more opaque and upper tiers of the supply chain. So if we move to the next slide, we can provide you a little bit background about the FLA Supply Chain Action Network. So if we look at the current direction of travel in terms of the supply chain due diligence, it's really looking at the full supply chain. Recently with the CSDDD, but also a lot of media attention is on upstream supply chains. So what we also see is, for example, within the US universities, the students are also demanding full supply chain visibility or the disclosure. There's customer demand around it. Also, companies are looking at full value chain to ensure business resilience and risk mitigation. And the positive part of it is companies are also looking at no supply chain disruptions and operational efficiencies. So the premise of all of this work around SCAN is the full supply chain is here to stay, or due diligence in full supply chains. And this is where FLA is moving towards. We have traditionally focused on Tier 1 through our manufacturing accreditation program, or Tier 4 through our agriculture accreditation program. And SCAN is really looking at the full value chain. And as part of that work, we want to bring in the different parts of supply chains, which could be subject to due diligence and what's happening, and hence the webinar. So if we move to the next slide, and if we look at just in terms of, the tier clarity. So as we go towards more raw material production, we look at we call it upstream, and downstream is as we are moving towards retailers, or more consumer facing operations. And what is interesting when we come to recycling is a lot of the companies have been looking at recycling from an environmental perspective or carbon footprint perspective. However, when we think about the recycled PET or recycled textiles, what we are looking at from an FLA perspective, it's a raw material. It is a commodity. So hence, we're thinking it from perspective of this is feeding into companies' products and company supply chain. And in addition to the environmental issues, what are the social issues that the Tearfund is going to talk about? So if you move to the next slide. In terms of the challenges, again, it's very well established that a lot of focus of companies has been traditionally on their direct tiers, so Tier 1, your manufacturing units. For agriculture supply chains, there have been certifications that have been running for a few years, but still what we have seen, at least in FLA's work, is the most salient human rights issues which are more in the opaque parts of the supply chains that have not been investigated as much in the past. But also, as you move upstream, the issues become more systemic in nature. They're not under the control of companies. The legislation, the implementation of the regulations is lower. The labor inspection is lower, and hence you see, there are less leverage, less monitoring, and also they're not still considered material to business. So I always say that, companies don't take quality for granted. Quality is embedded in how the product is produced. You don't say, okay, it's a project, it's embedded in the DNA of the product. Similarly, we want to see that human rights and labor standards are embedded in the product, and hence it's still the case that often social and human rights issues are not seen as part of the product, and it's not considered material to business. So if we move to the next slide, and specifically in terms of the recycled material, and Lorraine will talk about it more, what we see is a growing number of companies. And even if we look at the manufacturing, the footwear, apparel, we look at the agriculture or fast moving consumer goods or food packaging, any industry you look at, the use of plastics or the use of even recycled material, it's here to stay. I mean, more and more companies are looking at recycled material. Again, the issues that exist are informality, supply chain opacity. They often operate in challenging economic environment. And again, Tearfund will talk about it more. But also from a labor rights perspective, we see higher child labor risks. There are issues around trafficking. We have also seen issues around criminal activities when it goes to supply chains around waste pickers. Based on our work that we have done in Brazil, Egypt, and also a little bit in Thailand, there are definitely health and safety hazards, the vulnerability, the people have higher vulnerability, also in terms of lack of access to healthcare, lack of access to social security. This is an informal supply chain. The employment is not formal. It's as informal as it could get. And hence, many times in many countries, waste pickers are not part of policies, although we are starting to see some emergence of policies of waste pickers as well. And of course, there are environmental impacts that are associated with recycled material. So if we go to the next slide, and as part of all of this, what we are also trying to focus on is the solutions. So one part of it is, can we have standard tools, guidances, experiences shared for upstream supply chains? And Nisha will present one of the tools that we have created as part of this work, which is the Converged HREDD tool. Also looking at capacity building, setting expectations with the suppliers, because the suppliers may be like, where are you coming from? Why are you talking about these things? Supplier engagement is important and key part of it. And then really exploring joint actions and remediations where it's not, again, as you go up, the leverage becomes less, and hence the collective actions are required, whether it's collective engagement with stakeholders, with government on advocacy, whether it's remedial actions. And we have seen that collective actions actually go a long way. So if we move to the next slide, what I would like to now, and one of the examples of upstream solutions is the Harvesting the Future work that FLA does. It is in cotton sector, but also in other sectors, in other countries. And we have one of the participants of Harvesting the Future also as a panelist today, who have both used the HREDD Converged tool as well as participate in Harvesting the Future around collective remediation. So with that particular background, which is a big background, now what I would like to do is to invite Nisha and Lorraine to talk about the two tools that we have. And we can go to the next slide. Yes, so we have Nisha and Lorraine who will be presenting, but before that, we'll go to an audience poll very quickly. And if we can bring that audience poll on our screen, it's a short poll. And what it asks is, has your organization identified an existing tool or developed an internal tool to measure your own or your supplier HREDD performance for responsible management of upstream supply chains. So human rights, environmental due diligence performance. So it's not the auditing of the factory or the farm, it's really looking at the your suppliers' management systems around upstream supply chains. You have three answers: yes, no, not sure. Um, please go ahead. And once we have the results, it would be great to see the results online. Nisha, are you able to share the results?
Yep, these are the results.
Okay, somehow I'm not able to see them.
You able to see the results?
No, not as yet.
Okay, maybe we can reshare it later.
Okay, sure. So we'll share it later together. Once Lauren has also presented, we can present the results of the two polls together. But Nisha, please, let's move ahead with the HRED tool and share with the audience.
Thank you. Thank you, Richa. My name is Nisha Tirumalai, and I'm the Innovation Manager with the Fair Labor Association, and I manage the Human Rights and Environmental Due Diligence verification work for the FLA. So I'll just give a very brief overview about the tool, and then during the panel session, you can hear some of the experience companies has had using the tool. So the Converged HREDD tool was initially developed as an Excel-based tool. It has a question set with guidance, criteria on how to answer the questions between 33 to 38 questions. And the tool also it includes an auto-filled results engine. So as you are answering the self-assessment, there is a results tab there that you can immediately see in real time what the maturity level, the results of your assessments are. And it also has a gap assessment tab that is automated and it automatically generates the gap assessment based off the completion of the assessment. Once you've completed it, it will automatically generate a gap assessment based on the answers that you have provided and any gaps that may be identified in the assessment. It also comes with a guidance document. The guidance document actually explains the approach of the self-assessment, the definitions of the terms that are used in the tool, and it also provides companies with instructions on how to complete the self-assessment. How do you answer? How do you provide evidence, etc.? Can we go to the next slide, please? Okay, just a bit of a background on the the Converged HREDD tool self-assessment. So the tool was initially, it was originally authored by the FLA. We did this in collaboration with the Consumer Goods Forum, or CGF, to help their member companies conduct human rights due diligence in their own operations. So it was initially developed for companies to assess their own operations. And the tool was then further developed by AIM Progress and ProForest. And then they then piloted it with a number of companies and then took feedbacks from these companies and further refined the tool. And then the final version of the Converged HREDD tool was launched in November 2024. And in December 2024, FLA started working with a few companies. We piloted the tool with a few companies, and the assessment was completed around the first quarter of 2025. We also asked for feedback from the companies on their experience of using the tools, and then this feedback was then shared with the larger group with CJF, In Progress, and ProForest. We then collectively work to improve the tool. So we now have the version 2 of the tool, and there isn't much changes to the questionnaires or the maturity framework. The feedback will mostly on the presentation of the results, how the results can better represent the company's efforts. And then after that, In Progress and CJF partnered with the International Trade Center, ITC, to host the digital version of the tool. So now the tool is available in both Excel as an Excel tool, and you can also use the digital version, which is hosted on the ITC platform. So after my presentation, I will share both links to first download the Excel tool if you prefer to use the Excel-based version, and also a link to the ITC platform where you can set up an account and use the digital version of the tool. Can we go to the next slide, please? Now, before I go into why a company needs to have a human rights and environmental due diligence, I just want to give a little bit of background as to why there was a need to develop an HREDD self-assessment tool. So typically, the focus has always been in assessment of working conditions, for example, at the factory level or in the upstream supply chains. So there was very little focus on measuring human rights and environmental due diligence systems, or simply to measure the capability of the supplier in managing risks in the upstream supply chain, hence the development of this Converged HREDD tool. So why a company needs to have a strong human rights due diligence system is, first and foremost, it actually helps companies prevent harm before it actually happens. So instead of waiting for issues to become serious problems, companies can identify risks early on and take action to address them before workers, communities, or the environment becomes negatively affected. Secondly, it also helps companies stay compliant and stay in business. So there are already legal requirements and emerging legislations. So your buyer's expectations are increasing, yeah? And companies are now expected to show that they actually understand and can manage risks in their own operations and supply chain. And further than that, beyond compliance, due diligence actually also supports company making smarter decisions. So when companies have better visibility of their risks, they can actually strengthen their risk management and also help improve operations, and the company can then become more resilient. And finally, of course, it helps build trust and credibility, yeah? So your workers, investors, customers, your business partners, they want to know that you're taking your responsibility seriously. So a strong due diligence system sends the message that a company is actually committed to responsible and sustainable business practices. Can we go to the next slide, please? Okay, so the tool elements. So the questions in the tool asked about the processes related to elements of human rights and environmental due diligence. Yeah, it asks about your governance system, your policies, risk assessments that you have done. Are you doing in-depth investigations of the risks that have been identified? Are you prioritizing those risks, whether or not you are setting KPIs? So, you know, it's all related to the elements of human rights and environmental due diligence. And then the scopes being assessed in the tool is own operations, service providers, and supply chain. So all of these different scopes are being answered at the parent company level. So when a company is answering, when they're doing this self-assessment, they have to answer it at a parent company level. When I say own operations, service providers, and supply chains, it doesn't mean that the company first answer for own operations and then share the tool to answer for the service provider section of the assessment and then share the supply chain section to their suppliers. No, it's actually asking about what the companies are doing first for their own operations. And then when it comes to the service providers, it's asking the companies about the systems that they have put in place when managing or working with service providers. And the same for supply chains. What are the systems that the company themselves have put in place when dealing with their supply chains, well, basically what it's asking is whether the companies have put in place systems to identify risks and to manage risks within their supply chains. And then the tool also has a maturity levels to measure the companies. There's 4 maturity levels being measured: starting, launched, intermediate, and advanced. And then the tool also has a tab on gap assessment and action planning. So the gap assessment is an automated function. Based on the results of the assessment, it will show you what are the gaps and what are the steps you need to do in order to reach a certain maturity level. Say, for example, once you've completed the assessment, and you are in the launched maturity level, and your ambition as a company is to reach the advanced level, you can set it in the tool and it will show you what are the gaps and what you need to do. And then it also comes with an action planning template. So the companies can then take the gap assessments that have been automatically generated and then start doing their time-bound action plan to identify those risk areas. Next slide, please. Okay, now to explain a little bit on how the FLA has partnered with companies in HREDD assessments. So first and foremost, FLA has done verification work for companies who have completed the self-assessment and won a third party to verify their assessments. Yeah. So what FLA does is we verify the information provided by the company and the supporting documents shared by the company. So when a company answers the questionnaires, say for example, you answer yes to a question, you would then have to justify why you answer yes to that question. And that justification often requires supporting document, yeah, to support your justification. So what FLA does is we will look at your answers, we will look at the documents that you share, and we will help companies identify whether the proof that they have provided is enough to warrant a yes for the specific question. And then FLA also supports the company in developing an action plan once the assessment is completed. So wherever there are gaps in the assessment, FLA will provide the next steps or recommendations on how the companies can improve their due diligence systems. And FLA also supports companies in updating key documents, for example, by providing follow-up guidance and sharing standard templates for them to have a stronger policy, for example, in place. Lastly, FLA, once we have completed the assessment, the verification work, and the action planning, FLA provides companies who have completed the verification process with an assurance letter that states the score and the maturity level. And this assurance letter would ensure that the documents are FLA verified, and this assurance letter can then be used by the company for other clients that may be requesting for the same assessment. So a company wouldn't have to do the assessment multiple times for different clients. So once they have the assurance letter, they can just share the assurance letter to say that we have done the assessment for our own operations, service provider, and for particular supply chains, and this is the results of our assessment, and all of the documentations were verified by the FLA. So I think that's the end of my presentation. With this, I would like to pass on to Lorraine, who will be speaking on the waste speakers. Yeah, we can skip it on the waste speakers due diligence toolkit.
Yeah, and just before we get Lawrence, shall we do the second audience poll very, very quickly so that we can set up Lauren for, some of the, so that she knows if we can bring up the second audience poll. So the second audience poll is, has your organization been working on supporting or has committed to improving working conditions of the recycled material supply chain? So are you doing something, either supporting someone else or you as an organization doing something if you're a company on recycled material supply chain. We'll give 20 seconds and then we'll move to Lorraine by the time Nisha collates the information from both the polls. Okay, so in the interest of time, I hope you got a chance to answer the poll. So what I like to do is to invite Lorraine to talk about Tearfund and what great work they have been doing.
Thank you, Risha, and thank you, Nisha, for your presentation as well. Good afternoon, everyone. It's a real pleasure for me to be here with you today, and I'm representing the public policy team at Tearfund. And yeah, I'm excited to have this opportunity to share with you how the Tearfund Toolkit can complement the HREDD Toolkit, helping you as companies with the self-assessment of your complete value chain. So if we could move to the next slide, please. So for those of you who are not already familiar with Tearfund, Tearfund is an international relief and development NGO. We currently operate in over 50 countries. Our purpose is tackling poverty through sustainable development, disaster response, and challenging injustice. Over the last 5 years, our team has been working with leading plastic packaging users such as Coca-Cola, Pepsi, Nestle, and Unilever to apply the United Nations Guiding Principles, or UNGPs, to the informal waste sector in what have been called the Fair Circularity Principles. And these principles are advanced through the Fair Circularity Initiative, which is convened by Tearfund, and the Fair Circularity Initiative now includes an expanded corporate membership and the International Alliance of Waste Pickers membership as well, which brings a direct rights holder perspective into the initiative. As this area of Tearfund's work has unfolded, we identified a lack of inclusion of waste picker perspectives in corporate human rights due diligence processes. And so in response to this, Tearfund developed the Waste Picker Rights Due Diligence Toolkit to enable organisations to carry out participatory processes within their waste and recycling value chains. Moving to the next slide, please. So why extend outside the formal supply chain in human rights due diligence assessments? Well, I think Risha touched on this a little bit earlier, but waste pickers play a critical role in circular value chains through their recovery of waste materials for recycling in locations where companies' products are consumed, but structured and municipal waste management systems are not sufficient. And sometimes waste pickers are described as the backbone of world's recycling systems as they collect and sort waste materials such as plastics, textiles, metals, glass, and electronic waste. And they collect these from streets, dump sites, and households, and then return those materials back into the value chain. Waste pickers initiated recycling processes in many countries, and they're integral actors in extended producer responsibility, or EPR schemes, for waste products and packaging. Currently, approximately 60% of all plastic recovered for recycling globally is gathered and sorted by waste pickers. And there are an estimated 40 million people working as waste pickers globally as part of our corporate value chains. Moving on, please. So let's consider the typical human rights impacts that are experienced by these key stakeholders in the value chain. So the incomes from the sale of sorted waste materials back into the value chain are often far below the local living income level. and waste pickers are frequently excluded from vital social and financial services. Most waste pickers experience discrimination, stigmatization, and harassment on a daily basis as they go about their critical work. They can face challenges with respect for freedom of association and collective bargaining power. And one of the impacts of this can be their exclusion or unfair treatment in the local EPR schemes that brand owners are obligated to comply with. Waste picking involves very heavy manual work, and it's often in extreme weather conditions. The majority of the workers have no occupational health and safety protection. Studies and statistics demonstrate that women waste workers are more adversely impacted, and it's not uncommon for children to accompany their parents to work. In the last few years, some progress has been made to include the voices of waste pickers in national and international policy spaces. However, much more work is required here to fully address all of these human rights risks and impacts. On an optimistic note, companies have a real opportunity here in their human rights practices to ensure the human rights of waste pickers are respected and their role is recognised. And this can start with implementing participatory human rights due diligence processes and then using the data gathered to understand if the waste pickers are included and fairly treated in their EPR systems. Moving to the next slide, please. So looking at the contents of our Waste Picker Rights Due Diligence Toolkit, it was developed to use in either a manual or a digital format, similar to the HREDD tool, and it's designed to accommodate working in the field, gathering insights directly from the waste pickers themselves. The toolkit provides templates and key guidance for each of the phases to include advice on how to access, engage, and build trust with the waste picker organisations. This then sets you up to set up interviews and focus groups that will facilitate very transparent and open conversations with these rights holders. The phase structure of the toolkit commences with regulatory and economic context mapping for the geographies in which the waste pickers operate within your value chain. This engage phase also facilitates supply chain mapping through to the informal tier where the waste pickers collect material to sell back into the value chain to eventually reach your formal recyclers. The second phase, the assess phase, contains the participatory interview structure and enables you to gather insights relating to the risks and impacts from the rights holders directly. This structure aligns with the UNGPs, which stresses the importance of stakeholder engagement in this due diligence process. Then the data provided by the rights holders gives your company an accurate evidence base for identification of the key risks and impacts experienced by the waste pickers that are in your value chain. And the risk management module in this assess phase helps your teams to prioritise the risk levels and identify the true root causes. During the remediate and build capacity phase, Tearfund advises that the rights holders' perspectives are included in risk management and mitigation planning conversations, and likewise taking this collaborative approach in the monitoring phase as well. The digital version of the toolkit provides some great data visualization to support your risk analysis and ease of reporting. And Tearfund partnered with Freedom Seal Global, who hosts this digital version of the toolkit, and they can tailor the toolkit to your company's specific questions upon request if that's needed. And for more information about registering for the digital version of the toolkit, please email myself or info@thefreedomseal.com. The manual version of the toolkit is available for download at the link provided in the Q&A. But please do connect with me at all afterwards if you would like any further information about either format or demonstrations of the toolkit. So moving to my final slide, please. So what outcomes can companies expect from using the toolkit? Well, a key outcome is that companies will be supported in the journey to improve the quality of their approach to human rights due diligence through this meaningful engagement with all of the stakeholders. And as expectations and regulations on corporate reporting are increasing, your teams will need a clear, comparable, and accurate evidence base. And the data gathered via the interviews and assessments in the toolkit will provide you with this. The transparent data will also inform the impactful storytelling that's needed to support internal operational negotiations and external conversations at the policy level that aim to reduce risks and improve the working environment, livelihoods, and respect for the role of waste pickers. As an outcome of the participatory approach that this tool requires, companies can expect to build increased trust in key stakeholder relationships, which will develop into sustainable partnerships and ultimately more inclusive and equitable value chains. The outcomes create a knock-on effect that's more than just compliance. It enhances stakeholder collaboration and ultimately brand reputation. So in summary, the companies that commit to a true participatory approach and an inclusive approach can expect to be perceived as leaders in meaningful and impactful human rights due diligence, and then to influence peers with similar value chains and geographies to follow suit. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Lorraine and Nisha, for the presentations. So what we would like to do now is to move to our panelists to look at the use cases. So first, I would like to invite Ode Usla, who is the Human Rights Director at International Flavors and Fragrances. And Ode, you have tested the HREDD tool, you've used the HREDD tool. So take us through your experience using the tool.
Thanks, Nisha, and thanks for having me. Hello, everyone. So as Richa was saying, I work for IFF, International Flavors and Fragrances. And just to say a few words about this, so our company manufactures flavors and fragrances, as you can guess, but also a lot of other solutions, including enzymes, including health and bioscience solutions for consumer products. And we work with a vast network of customers, but also with a vast network of suppliers. And from a supply chain perspective, we source about 20,000 raw materials from over 100 countries. So it means a lot of complexity. And when we talk about human rights due diligence, it does matter actually to look at this. And this is where I think, toolkits like the HREDD tool are really important for companies like us. Because when you're a B2B company, you're very focused on delivering things to your customers. You're very focused on results. And you can get, you can lose sight a bit of things that relate more closely to the UN guiding principles, to how you undertake a proper human rights due diligence approach, because you're going to focus on things that matter, on supply chains where you get questions, on supply chains where you have risks, but keeping at the same time, this idea of having a broad view and a comprehensive approach to where you might have risks across your operations and your supply chains is really important. And this is where tools like this are really helpful.
Great, thank you. You may come back a little bit later, if you react to other panelists, but I would like to bring in Michael here just also to talk about the use case of or testing the tool in Kenya, the waste pickers tool in Kenya. So Michael, would you like to talk through your organization as well as, what was the experience testing the tool and piloting the tool on the ground?
Thank you. Thank you very much, Rachel, for the opportunity and everyone else who has made this possible. I'm excited to be part of this conversation today. And I would like to mention, my name is Michael Lofok. I'm the Director and Lead Consultant at Pamic Consulting Limited. This is a private company based in Kenya that provides research services to organizations in different fields, including we do research on human rights, issues of community development, we support organization capacity building and development, and we also support issues of climate change and natural resource management and circular economy. So in light of this, we were engaged as a consultant by Tearfund, and specifically to undertake a human rights due diligence assessment in Nairobi. And Nairobi uniquely has a very varied structure and system of waste management with different actors, but specific interest in this case was waste pickers. But the scope of the assignment was basically to understand the human rights situation and the labor situation around the waste pickers in these particular value chains. So we actually deployed the human rights due diligence tool developed by Tearfund and its partners. And one unique thing about the tool was the fact that it was so systematic and structured, and it had already mapped different categories of actors in the value chains. So on that basis, we were actually able to just do sampling approaches for each category. So in our work, in our engagement, we were able to engage and collect collect information or have discussion with 350 waste speakers, but also had interviews with different other actors like waste recyclers participated in the process. We also were able to use the same tool, which provided an opportunity to do focus group discussions. So we were able to do focus group discussions, which brought together diverse stakeholders in a forum to speak and discuss issues around their human rights situation. It was interesting because we were able to get different categories of people where we had about 7% of women participating, and we had about 42% of women participating, and the age range was mostly around averaging 26.9 years old, and they were able to actually deliberate and give us insights in terms of the human rights situation in Nairobi, and we were able to extract some of the root causes and the drivers, and most importantly, they were participatorily engaging to identify various risk assessment. They were able to participatorily do that and even make suggestions in terms of what will be the mitigation measures for this. So this is how useful we got this. We found this tool.
That's great, Michael. And are there any other learnings that you would like to share? And I just want to make sure that if there are other slides that we go through. Is there anything you would like to present here?
yes, this is a sample of some of the findings that we came up with. We found that so this is actually directly extracted from the tool, because we were able to actually input this information together with the stakeholders on the waste speakers and the various stakeholders, and then we're able to summarize and extract this information that does the risk analysis. So it does the risk assessment in various categories. For example, you see we have issues around health, we have issues around environment, gender, and the ratings of those risks, as well as some of the proposed mitigation measures. So this is just an illustration of what the tool is actually able to help you achieve. But additional to this is to note that we found, other than risk management, the participatory nature of this tool really helps to build trust, because the different actors, when you engage with them, you are becoming open, but also builds trust among the actors themselves, because it brings them together in a platform through which they are able to discuss. Another learning in this context, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah. So another learning is the ability, of course, of this tool to help in gathering evidence, which can support different actors in reporting, for example, in terms of responsible business conduct, various organizations. The data is able to help in identifying risk and manage this risk quite way in advance before they actually materialize. So in summary, I think that's what I would like to share about the tool.
Great. Thank you, Michael. And Lauren, I'd like to very quickly bring you here, briefly, if you could just talk about, I mean, we have seen the tool, Michael has talked about the use case and the learnings, but do companies need to have their supply chain mapped in order to use this tool? That's one. And secondly, can companies use it themselves, or do they have to work with a third party to use the tool?
Thank you for that question. So to answer the second part of the question first is companies can use our tools themselves, their human rights team or compliance team. As a company, they can use the tool themselves, or alternatively, they can work with consultants who can carry out this process for them using third parties. Sometimes using third parties who are really experienced in the field, who register for the tools, provides the benefit of having the expertise of using the tools, but also they can be received by the rights holders as a more independent party, and the other parties in the supply chain. And then this independence can support a quicker development of the kind of trusted relationships and open conversations with the stakeholders. So I hope that answers that part of the question. But yes, you can use the tool directly yourself or with a consultant who can work on behalf of one company or a couple of companies who may share the same geography and suppliers. In terms of the supply chain mapping, our tool provides you with the ability to do that. But if you were to be using this tool in conjunction with another tool, or you may already have a brilliant supply chain, accurate, up-to-date map, then you can either digitally upload with AI that supply chain map information into our tool, or you can just use our tool from the the assess phase where you come in and start engaging with the rights holders themselves to create the relationships and carry out the interviews and the focus groups. So I think hopefully that's answered. You can either use the mapping you have, or you can use this to update your mapping either way.
Great. Thanks, Lauren. And thanks, Michael. So last but not the least, I would really like to invite Maxim, who is with the FLA and who is leading the work with SCAN. And my question to Maxim is, Maxim, you see with upstream work coming along more and more, the focus on upstream, there will be proliferation of tools. So we have the HREDD tool, we of course have the waste pickers tool now, and there are many others. So how do you see the complementarity of these different tools, and how do you see, what company should be using? What are some criteria, if I may ask?
Yeah, thanks, Richa, and nice to be here. So very quickly about the questions. First, I think before I move into the complementarity and the proliferation, I think what's important to keep in mind is that these tools should be used differently from social audit tools. So they're not compliance tools. They should be seen as a tool to initiate positive dialogue with companies, suppliers, and to clarify buyers' expectations through a structured frame. And I think that's very important because we know that social audits have their limitations to identify these human rights risks. And I think that's where these tools, these human rights and environmental due diligence tools, are critical, or the one from Tearfund. And I think ultimately that will allow proactive, progressive, and effective improvements of the company's suppliers' human rights risk management systems. Now, on the proliferation of tools that you mentioned quickly, so I think, and that's how we see it from the FLA side, we are happy to see that there are multiple tools. It is the sign that companies are taking human rights due diligence seriously. It is the sign that different sectors and companies are building or tailoring the tools to their specific needs and contexts. So it's good. And of course, it's also the sign that these companies are becoming more mature and recognizing in their human rights due diligence approach by recognizing that they need both things like scale. And I think Ud, when she mentioned the many 20,000 or something raw materials, speaks to that some companies need for certain things scale. And at the same time, in some very high-risk areas, you might need something much more context-specific. And that's where the Tearfund tool is very relevant. So I think there is complementarity between both. And so proliferation is not an issue as long as these tools are aligned with international standards. So it can be the OECD guidelines or the United Nations guiding principles on business and human rights, which will allow or ensure that these tools are effective and also that they're aligned with the legislation. Now, specifically on these two tools, in terms of complementarity, the way I see it is we have on the one hand the Fair Labor Association Human Rights and Environmental Due Diligence tool, which is sector agnostic. It was built together with the Consumer Goods Forum, In Progress, and ProForest. So it is aligned across many sectors, and it can be used very widely and at scale. And it's really aimed at assessing governance systems, as Nisha explained very well earlier. So both on operations, management systems, the supplier maturity level, etc. However, it will exclude things such as downstream tiers to product disposal, for example, things like that. And that's where the Tearfund tool is a good complement, or a good, say, friend of the HREDD tool, is really where it's very context specific to the waste and recycling sector, with the context mapping, participatory interviews, etc. And so basically for us as FLA, as part of that Supply Chain Action Network, or SCAN, as we call it, project on which I'm working on. So what we want to impulse is really a more systematic work for companies across higher tiers of their supply chains. And this is why, as the FLA, we're very happy to see more tools out there, such as the one from Tearfund. And we hope it can support companies further deep dives into informal recycled materials or waste picker value chains. And we can only encourage companies, of course, to adopt one or more than one HRDD tools that seems most adapted to their needs. And of course, we as FLA, and as Lorraine was mentioning with Tearfund too, and we could also imagine collaborative work, would be happy to support any work stream in that sense. So thanks.
Okay, thanks, Maxim. We don't have much time left, but I want to invite any of our panelists to comment on, other panelists, or if they have any other remarks that they would like to make based on what we discussed today. Okay. If not, I want to see if audience have any questions. Usually we would have, them in the Q&A. I don't see any questions. Maybe we give our audience some time if they would like to put any questions. If not, I have a question, but let's see if our audience have any questions. Okay, I don't see any, and maybe or I can put you on spot here. You have used the tool at the request of your client, yeah, and you mentioned about B2B. So one is that experience, but do you think that this tool could be useful for you to use for your own suppliers?
That's a good question, Richa, and thanks a lot. I think it depends on which size of suppliers we're looking at, because the tool that we're talking about is really good to assess, I would say, a fairly sizable company in terms of, do you have governance structure appropriate to support your human rights diligence? Do you have the right policies in place? And for small companies, when you're talking about family business, for instance, they have a different setup. That being said, the key principles will remain the same. So you want to ensure that they have a team that would steer this project, that they have the right management systems in place. Sometimes they don't need a full-blown policy, but they need to have, laid down on paper a few clear steps of, this is how we need to address this issue. So I think, it's not really far. It's just a matter of how you use the toolkit, but I think it's true for any toolkit, right? It's a matter of you need to be, I would not say creative, because then you get too far away sometimes from the results you expect, but you need to be smart with using this type of tools. And, the approach is going to be the same for big and small size companies. It's just a matter of how exactly you will stick to the different boxes in the tool, but it can be easily adapted.
Yeah. Great. I think you highlight implicitly the fact, and this is for me remains one of the biggest learnings of any toolkit, is the engagement remains at the center of it. So you can use a toolkit, you can use a dialogue, you can go, sit with them. Toolkits, it helps you structure, but the engagement that you can have is the central piece of all of it. And I think Maxim said the same thing. So I'll maybe invite Nisha as a closing to see if she can verbally, I think we have some technological issue, but if she can verbally share the results of the poll. And then on the last slide, we have the contact information from everyone. Nisha, can you verbally share the results of the poll?
Yes, absolutely. So for the first question, has your organization identified an existing tool or developed an internal tool to measure your own or your suppliers' HREDD performance for responsible management of upstream supply chains? 43% answered yes, 43% answered no, and 14% answered not sure.
Great.
And for the second poll, the question is, has your organization been working on supporting or has committed to improving working conditions in the recycled materials supply chain? 86% said yes, 14% said no, and nobody said not sure.
Wow, I'm actually surprised by the second one, that 83% have something going on in the recycling sector. So that's great. Thank you, Nisha. And with that, I really would like to thank our panelists, for sharing their thoughts. And what we have is we have the information about the leads. So from FLA side, Nisha leads the work on the HREDD tool. Her email is there. We have Maxim, who is leading the work on SCAN, and we have Lorraine, who of course you heard leading the work at the Tearfund. So with that, we would like to close this webinar. Thank you very much, and we will share the recording with the registrants. Have a good day. Bye-bye.